Right.
There's your Wiggins. What's up, man? Look at this crew over here. All right, let's do this.
Isn't it great? Right. So, as I said to you before, Jack and I have had the fun of doing this together all the way through. And it's really been a privilege to watch his career shape and form. And many of you probably served in some capacity in the armed forces and all. And so some of you have commented about how brilliantly Jack made a transition from service to writing. So you've described that, and there are 3 words. Do you remember the 3 words? We just did this.
I do
so
now.
I know you remember
I do
the
now.
3
Yeah.
words. Right. So how did you do that?
Well, I made a couple. I noticed how people leaving the military sometimes had a hard time leaving that behind because you're so focused on the task at hand, you're so focused on the mission, and then a lot of my friends try to replicate that in the private sector. So I was aware of that as I was getting ready to leave the military, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do, so that was helpful. But my mission was very clear. It was taking care of my family, but our middle child in particular, who has some severe special needs and needs 24/7 full-time care forever. So my mission was taking care of my family, specifically him. My passion was writing, so I put those 2 together to give me purpose going forward. So I think you can identify that mission in life and your passion in life and combine those to give you purpose. It's certainly beneficial.
Well, it has given Jack a very, what do I want to say, targeted, at least focused approach.
Targeted, I like that. It happens to be the title of my upcoming nonfiction book that's coming out in a year and a half. So very nice, Barbara. Thank you.
Great choice of words. So I asked Jack when we started, it's hard for me now because I'm going to trip over what I've already asked him, but you haven't heard it, so I guess it'll be okay. When you started writing, who did you expect your audience to be?
So I didn't really think about that at all. I didn't think about, hey, what's selling right now? What do I think people are going to like? Who my audience is? What should I say to build an audience? I didn't think about any of that. It was all about the story, and it remains about the story to this day. And I'm very fortunate to be with a publisher who has never given me any sort of a hint that I should, maybe lay off on this over here, or maybe put a little more of this in. Do you think you're alienating anybody? Like, never even once hinted at that. And then an agent also who never gives me any advice, which I didn't expect, because my only view of an agent was from Entourage or Californication, for anybody who's seen that, and that's not my agent. So I didn't really know what to expect. I thought maybe they would try to shape a career or something like that, and there's 0 of that, which is great, because it all is just only about the story, because I think it has to be, because people are trusting me with this time that they're never going to get back. So whether it's a post on Instagram or Twitter or a blog or a question on my podcast or a sentence in the novel, people are trusting me with that time, so that's something I take extremely seriously. So it's all about the story.
And what Jack is talking about is that they haven't asked him to tone down the violence. And, well, what was it you said? That, it's all right if you disembowel some guy and wrap it around a tree?
Yeah, no, I was a little worried about that one for the first book. And then I got a little more worried when I walked into Simon & Schuster, and I walked in and went up there and started meeting everybody and saying thank you. And I noticed that almost everyone there was female. And I was like, oh, interesting. And then we went to this little kind of a little party in there, just get to say hi to a few people. And there was this one lady that was about that far away where those T-shirts are over there, just staring at me. And I was like, oh, I know the scene, and she hates it. And she just watched me the whole time. And then everybody started to filter back and, go out or leave for the day or whatever. And she walked over, and I was like, here it comes. And she said, you know that scene where you disembowel that guy and make him walk around the tree and he gets eaten alive by the swamp? And I was like, yep. And she says, I loved it. It's like, I was like, yes, it's awesome.
Wow, right. So some of you may wonder why an 82-year-old woman like me, who's never served in the armed services, is kind of, Jack, we do this together. But so far I haven't flinched away from...
No, you've been very agreeable. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So when you talk about story, what in your background... you went into the military with an end goal, and it was your mom, the librarian. This is Mother's Day, so I think we should all thank Jack's mom, right? Yay, Jack's mom. And also Jack's wife, who is not here, as you notice, but is in fact home doing child caring and other things. Your wife, Faith, deserves a big hand in all this, doesn't she?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, all those years in the military, she knew that the pendulum was on the side of the team because it has to be when you're taking guys downrange and going to Iraq and Afghanistan. You can't really have balance. People talk about work-life balance, and it doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for. I didn't even try it because you have to be the best leader, better operator every single day. You got to be better leader and operator today than you were yesterday, and that pendulum has to be on the side of the team because that's what you owe those guys you're taking downrange, and what you owe the team, the mission, the country. And so she was on board with that. She knew it. But you hint that maybe it'll swing back the other way at some point, but not when you're in. There's too much writing on your decisions downrange. So yeah, she deserves a little bit of credit for all this. Yeah.
There's no question that military lives, actually, if you're reading police pursuit cop novels, one of the things you learn is how hard it is to be married to a cop. And it really doesn't matter if it's the woman who's the cop and the guy is the spouse or the other way around. It's still a consuming, the clock is always ticking, whatever it is. And that's certainly true. Although you were deployed a lot of the time. And so Faith and the kids were at home, right?
Yep, that's right. It's so much easier for us going downrange because we're only focused on the mission. We're building target packages. You're going out to kicking doors in the middle of the night with your best friends to your right and left, your teammates, and then your spouse is at home dealing with crying children and diapers and leaky roofs and paying all the bills. And I had to write a check the other day, and I realized that I hadn't written a check in 23 years. Yeah. Because I did before I was married, I wrote, you write your checks and you pay your bills. And then we got married and I went downrange, went deployed. And then she just took over doing all that. So then things switched to web bill pay or whatever else. And she just continued as we got out of the military. And I had to write a check the other day and I had no idea what to do. I had to think about it. I was like, wait, what are you supposed to do right here? So yeah, she did all that. She continues to do all that today, which gives me time to write these books. And this one ended up being a lot longer than the last one. So I needed a little more time with it.
Maybe we should teach him about direct pay. What do you think? Right. So I mentioned that because, and we didn't talk about that in the last conversation, that Katie, we really didn't mention Reese's wife, Katie.
Love interest at this point. But.
Well, I want to legitimize her. Okay. Is that all right?
We're to make an honest woman of her. Yes.
I have my breaking point. No, seriously. I mean, it's important, I think, to recognize that there is, a relationship and a woman who is supportive of James Reese.
Yeah, and so when I wrote it, it's very natural. I didn't even think about this in these terms when I wrote the first novel, and it was very natural for me to have strong female characters in the book, just naturally. I didn't think about, what this could really use is a strong female character. No, it was very natural. It was my mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and in particular, great-grandmother and grandmother lived through the Great Depression and, of course, World War II and all of this. And they were just so strong and such great role models for me as a kid growing up. So it was just very natural to include strong female characters in my novels. And then once again, when I got to Simon & Schuster and saw all the females there, I was like, that probably didn't hurt me to have that in the novels.
Yeah, I'm sure it didn't. So talk about the themes, because each of your books has a theme, and the theme is central to your creative process. So take it from the terminalist forward.
Yeah, so I heard Stephen Pressfield on Joe Rogan years ago, and Stephen Pressfield, of course, wrote Gates of Fire, Legend of Bagger Vance, Afghan Campaign, series of books on creativity that start with The War of Art, and then there's Turning Pro and Authentic Swing, and he's just a fantastic guy. And now we're friends, so he told me that I misinterpreted what he said. And what I thought he said was that he took a yellow sticky, wrote one word theme on it, put it next to his typewriter as he would write. And so I said, that's a fantastic idea. So I wrote Revenge for that first one, and then I cheated a little bit and wrote Revenge Without Constraint. So that was the theme of the first novel that guided the writing process and brought everything back to that theme, whether it was direct or indirect, more importantly. And then when I got to know him, he told me that's not at all what he said. What he said was that there was a playwright in New York years ago who would write a paragraph or two that would guide his process writing these plays. And I was like, whoa, I really missed that boat on that. I'm not sure. I'm glad I did, though, because I think it really did. There's been very few content edits from my editor, Emily Bessler Books at Simon & Schuster, coming back. And I thought there might be a ton. When you send this off to New York and you have no touch points with publishing, I mean, you don't know. There are very few content edits, more like things along the lines of, can you describe this for someone who hasn't been in the military type of thing? Or would he really have said this right here? And so minor things like that, maybe just 2 or 3 of them. And it's been that way for all of the books. And I think that's because of the theme. And that's what I start with. I don't write and then come up with a theme as I'm writing. I start out with the title, so I'm not wasting any bandwidth, worried about a title. I have that theme, so I can just tie everything back to it indirectly, most importantly. And then I turn that into this 1-page executive summary, and then I read that, and I say, is this worth the next year and a half of my life? And if the answer is yes, and I read it again and say, somebody is walking through the airport and goes into Hudson News and grabs this off a shelf, and they read the back of it, would they be willing to invest time they're never going to get back in this story? And if the answer is yes, or probably, then that's the next book, and I turn that into the outline, and then that outline into the narrative. But the second book was all about redemption, so it was a violent redemption, so I wrote that on a yellow sticky. Third one, Savage Son, right here. I explored the dark side of man. And this is where I talked to Stephen Pressfield and found out that I had it wrong. So that's the dark side of man through the dynamic of hunter and hunted. Next one is The Devil's Hand, and I wanted to take a look at the United States through the eyes of the enemy. And by that I mean through Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, super empowered individual, terrorist organization, and ask the question, what would they have learned from watching us on the field of battle over the last 20 years, and what would they have incorporated from those lessons into their future battle plans? So that was the next one, and that's a lot longer than one word or two. And then from that one, I went into my last one, In the Blood, which was a sniper-centric novel of violent resolutions. And that one, the trick with that one for me anyway, was figuring out how to write a sniper novel, which I wanted to write forever, but that didn't go back to that scene that we've all seen a bunch of times in books and films and movies that have 2 snipers looking for each other, on hillsides across from one another, or buildings across from one another, and then they find each other at the same moment, and they both fire, and one bullet goes through the scope and gets the other guy in the eye. And I was like, gosh, how do I write a sniper-centric novel without this? So I thought about having this standoff where maybe it's not the person with the best technical ability, but it's the person who can outthink the other. So that was that one. And then this one right here is a novel of truth and consequences, and that guided this process, this whole writing process, and is interesting because there seems to be a lack of accountability at some of our senior levels in government and military. So it's very therapeutic for me to write these as well.
And to read them, I might add, right? Mm-hmm. So I have to say that among the various authors that Jack admires and credits in part for his success is Stephen Hunter. And you know what? It'd be really hard to write a dual sniper novel after Stephen Hunter.
That's right. He is the
master of it.
He is. And now it's amazing. All these guys I looked up to for so many years are now, I can text them and email them and talk to them. And so Stephen Pressfield, Stephen Hunter, and David Morrell, who created Rambo back in 1972 with First Blood. And then, of course, the Brotherhood of the Rose Abelard series, sanctioned series, and just an incredible, what a kind person. And all those guys are just fantastic. So for me, it's just such a thrill and an honor to be able to talk to those guys and reach out to them and talk to them, all of those guys, probably once a week or so.
Actually, Jack and I bonded over a dead author called Jeffrey Household, who wrote a book called Rogue Male, which is from the 1930s, is in many ways the seminal thriller.
Yeah, so 1939, on the eve of World War II, essentially, and there's language specific to that novel in Savage Son right here. So for people that were fans of that or understand the history of the genre, and for this one in particular, for Savage Son, it goes back to Most Dangerous Game. Anybody read Most Dangerous Game back in 6th grade? Nice, awesome. That's about half. We'll work on it. So Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, written in the early 1920s, and so even back in the 6th grade when I read that, I knew that one day I'd write a thriller that paid tribute to that novel. So really, I mean, you can go back farther, but for me in 6th grade, reading that and kind of cementing me on my path on that side of the house, it was that, then Rogue Male 1939, First Blood 1972, and then the mid-80s we get Last of the Breed by Louis L'Amour. So those 4 really informed the pages of Savage Son.
So if you're not taking notes, Jack has helpfully written all that in the afterword in the book, and I recommend you read the afterword, but not until you've read the book, because there are always some slight spoilers in an afterword. There's also a very helpful glossary of terms for, people like me who know nothing about weapons. It's a good idea to, figure that one out. And then there's
for those who have read it, it's not like a dry glossary. I got a
No,
couple
it's very-
zingers in there too. So if anybody, just as a reward for people that actually go through it. But these ones I started doing, so I always set the tone with a preface. So I start off, set the tone for the novel with a preface. So I do that. And then for the fourth novel, for The Devil's Hand, I started writing an author's note at the end. And I did that because all the research I did on bioweapons, which the United States calls biodefense research, but it's the same thing as bioweapons research. I thought people are going to be wondering what was true and what wasn't when they get to the end of this book. So I just wrote a few pages on what was true, what was not, what was fact, what was fiction, and put that in there. And then I did it for the last book too, and I went deep down the rabbit hole on artificial intelligence and quantum computing, and I did it again on this one right here. So I really enjoy getting to the end and then doing that, get to pay tribute to some of the authors that inspired me for that particular book, or some of the research that inspired it, and spell out what was fact and what was fiction.
So Jack's books come with bonus features, which is really a very useful thing. I'm now thinking of a new term, the dynamic glossary.
Dynamic glossary. I like
dynamic
it.
glossary.
I like it. I'll give you credit in the acknowledgments.
Thank you. At dinner last night, I gave Jack at least 2 really great phrases.
Yeah, I gave you 2
yep.
last night. I wrote them down and
Right.
sent them to I have an email account that I just send ideas to. So it goes on a computer that is just for writing, and has an email that just for those lines, or a location I want to use, or a theme I want to explore, or something I want to incorporate in, whether it's gear or a person or whatever it might be. So those get emailed to me as I'm just on the run. And then as I'm writing, I have a folder. So for this book, I have a little folder on the same computer that I only use for writing, and so there's nothing else on there but the book. But as I'm going along, I think, oh, I need to explore this in a future novel. That goes in there. Another thing goes in there, and then I just build that as I'm writing this, so that when I get to the end, I have all that and can go back through and start sifting through it to figure out where I'm going next and what I'm going to explore next.
So Savage Son is the book you really wanted to write first, but instead you wrote The Terminal List. Why is that? Why did you postpone Savage Son for a little while?
So I wrote down when I first started out, I didn't read any books on process, really. I read autobiographies of authors. I read Stephen King's On Writing. I read The Successful Novelist. I read Stephen Pressfield's books on creativity. But today you can pretty much spend all your time researching how to do something and not actually doing it, just because you're in search of the end of the internet and you'll never find it. So eventually you have to execute. So what I did is I just said, well, let's see what do I want to explore here. And I wrote down 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different one-page executive summaries, laid them all out on the table. And Savage Son was the one that I really wanted to write first, because I've been thinking about that one since 6th grade, and that's the one I wanted to go in with, but I knew the characters weren't developed enough to explore the themes of Savage Son. So it was very evident, very clear that The Terminal List was the one to start with, to introduce these characters, and it was very primal, very visceral, very violent, very hard-hitting out of the gate. So I thought that's the one to start with. And then even when I got to the end of that, I still knew that the characters weren't developed enough to explore the themes of Savage Son. So I had to write True Believer first and take James Reese on this story of violent redemption. When I got to the end of that, then I knew it was time for Savage Son.
I'm going to digress, which I often do, and go back to Stephen Hunter. Jack has come down to the store at different times to hang out with Clive Cussler, and one glorious night, Stephen Hunter and Mark Graney and Jack were here for Stephen Hunter's book launch, right? Stephen Hunter is like the master sniper and the master guy about guns and all, but he wrote a book. I don't even know if we have a copy, so this is not a commercial, but I'm going to recommend it to you, called The 47th Samurai. And the guy, it starts with Earl at Iwo Jima, if I remember right. And then it transitions to Bobby, because it's a 2-generation thing, the snipers. And in order for Bobby to follow a trail back to Japan, where a samurai sword master is the guy he's going to go up against, Bobby's a gun guy, and the Japanese guy is a sword guy. Points to you if you can figure out how Bob Lee may take down the Japanese samurai guy. When I got to page 162, I wrote to Stephen and I said, I'm on page 162 and I know how this is going to work. And he wrote back, shit, but it actually did work. What are you doing, Patrick? Oh, you have a thank you. This is seriously one of my all-time favorite thrillers.
it is, right there.
Yep, I can't.
But you got to start with the beginning. You got to start with point of impact.
Well, yeah, but this is I think the reason I love this is because it's hard to imagine a gun guy can actually change weapons, change gears, and take on a sword guy.
But if you think about it, you don't want to bring the sword to the gunfight. But
Sorry, I just couldn't resist the commercial for Steven because it truly is. He really is. And isn't it great when a person, a series that you think is going to go one way can just throw you a surprise out of the blue? I mean, it can't happen often, right?
But you're trying to get a few things in there, every time that people aren't. So I've been, in this one in particular, I've been kind of setting a trail of breadcrumbs for people to as far as what's in this safe deposit box left behind for James Reese by his dad. And so I'd be shocked if anybody could actually have figured out ahead of time what's really in there. But that meant I had to figure it out too. So I had to.
That's right.
And
otherwise it was a blank page.
Yeah, I introduced it in Savage Son, and then it took me a couple books to figure out what's actually in that thing. But in this book, I tie up a lot of loose ends, so you just might find out what's in there.
So, with no spoilers, this book opens with James Reese in a Supermax. Now, Jack likes to actually research locations in locations, so I asked him in the 1 o'clock show if he'd spent time in a Supermax. And the answer is...
Well, thankfully not. So I was close a couple times, but I managed to skirt actually having to serve any time, which is fantastic. But I went in to that one, and I think it is almost exactly as I describe it, save for the lack of light. I think in this particular cell, in this particular prison in Colorado, that they have to let a little bit of light in. But in this, I had them black that out, and so James Reese is alone. He is cold, on the verge of hypothermia, and he has to explore this cell. He's naked in there, and he has to explore this cell by feel. And so that's how I go about describing the cell, is just how he feels without some of his senses, to be able to see exactly where he is. And it's also a way for me to catch readers up on what happened in the story up to this point, because he's in his own head, and he's trying to figure out who put him in there, how he's going to get out of there, what's going to happen when he gets out. And when you're in the dark for that long, and you have food coming in, but it's at irregular intervals to continue to mess with you, it's a good way to just go back in the memory banks and use it as a way to introduce readers who don't know the backstory to it, or to catch people up who are familiar, but it's been a year or so since they've dived into the last novel. But in The Devil's Hand, I figured out a way also to catch people up, and I did that through a polygraph. So for those who have been in the FBI or CIA, there's this thing called the lifestyle poly, and it's 2 days of being hooked up to the machine, and it's very uncomfortable. It's probably the most uncomfortable room in the world, and so that's how I had James Reese fill in readers on the backstory by getting asked these questions as he's hooked up to this lifestyle poly.
So Only the Dead is your longest book, as any of you can see who are actually hefting it. At the 1 o'clock show, we had this wonderful little boy. He struggled down the aisle holding on to the book, and I was worried he'd drop it. But he made it all the way to his seat. Good for him.
Yeah, no, he's a strong little guy. This thing right here, 139,000 words. Because once again, at the beginning, I don't go in with I'm going to get to 100,000, and then I'm going to start wrapping things up. It's all about the story right here. And it's also multiple use technology, so you can use this as a blunt impact weapon, or as a doorstop if need be. So, yeah.
So why is it so long?
That's just how long it takes. So it could have been 100,000 words if that was the best story possible. It could have been 110,000, could have been 120. And I was thinking, now that I've done this 6 times, I thought from the outline, this will be about 120,000, 115, 120,000, and blew right past those, blew past 125, 130, 135, and creeping up on 140,000 words before it was right. So, and that's just how long the story takes. And I know Simon & Schuster probably doesn't like it, but I'm not too concerned with deadlines. I'm only concerned with the story and making it the best that it can possibly be, because people are trusting me with that time that they're never getting back. So the story's going to take as long as it takes.
So we're not going to do any spoilers, but there is a lot of actual history that Jack is quoting in the book. why don't we digress here for a moment and talk about the book that's coming out in the fall of 2024, and then we can come back to this.
Yeah, so my first foray into the nonfiction space, and I always wanted to investigate different terrorist events that were very impactful to me growing up, and that still loom large over U.S. foreign policy today. And so I wrote down a list of those, and thought, the one to start with here is the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing, and it's the largest Marine Corps loss of life since Iwo Jima in World War II. And I just wanted it's one of those events that now people kind of remember it, like, oh, I remember that, but it's just there's so many distractions out there. I want to keep some of that history alive and those lessons alive, so hopefully going forward we can apply those lessons as wisdom, and no one else has to learn those lessons in blood going forward. So I'm working on it with an amazing guy, James Scott, historian and Pulitzer Prize finalist, who's been writes mostly World War II books. He has 5 books out there. Incredible guy. But there's also, for this one, there's kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there was a attack on the U.S. Embassy in Beirut in April of 1983, which led into the October Marine barracks bombing. But in between, there are a lot of discussions going on in the Oval Office, and a lot of those have been declassified from the Reagan White House recently. So you can go in and see who's pushing to bring Marines ashore, and who wanted to keep them on an amphib ship in the Med, how that decision was made, and all that leads up to the bombing. Just a few days before the bombing was one of the last times that they had in the Oval Office to avert that attack, really. But then there's also an ending to it, and the person who planned it ended up becoming the number 2 at Hezbollah and the number 1 of their militant wing. And he was killed in 2008 in Damascus, Syria, in a targeted assassination, probably in what was a joint CIA-Mossad operation with using proxies of the Mossad and some technical intelligence from the CIA. So it has this investigative journalist aspect to it as well. So that'll come out in a year and a half, and it's part of the targeted series is what I'm calling it. And when I pitched it to Simon & Schuster, I said there's going to be 1 a year every fall. And as soon as I got into the research, I realized that it's going to take a lot longer to do the story justice in the way that I want to. So I called them back and said, I know the contract says every year, but it's going to be every 2 years. So
what happens here is that Jack is using his storytelling ability to describe real events instead of the stuff, actually, the shit he makes up in the Terminalist books.
Barbara, language. Goodness. It's Mother's Day. Gosh.
I'm trying to live up to the lady at Simon & Schuster who really... I'm not. But no, seriously, narrative nonfiction really sounds like an oxymoron because, it implies story and true events. But you can tell history, real events, with a storyteller's impulse, right? So that's why the 2 of you are doing this together. You're strong on the storyteller aspect, but you also like real stuff, and he is. But the difference is that when you're writing the Terminalist books, you get to make up the events rather than having to hew to what really happened.
Yeah, you get to kill all the bad guys, which is wonderful, and then you create new bad guys for the next story, which is also fun because you get to create these new characters who, when I do it, I don't really know them yet until they get in conversation with other characters in the book. So I'll have like head of Russian intelligence or Russian mafia or something, and I try to get a name that doesn't sound too similar if they're Russian last names, which is kind of difficult to do. But I don't know them yet. I know what they're going to do in the story. I know why they're in there, but I don't know their personalities yet until I put them on the page and then I have them interacting with other characters, and that's when they come to life. So I really enjoy writing the dialogue because I'm getting to know new characters as well through that process.
So there is actual history in Only the Dead, some of which will seem familiar to you, and some of it is because some of the documents involved, and we're not going to do any spoilers here, but some of the documents are still classified, meaning nobody's ever read them. So Jack can, in fact, make up whatever he wants to be in those documents. And, someday that might be contradicted if they ever do let him out, but you don't know.
Educated assessment.
An educated
Yes, Barbara.
assessment. Sorry, it was, yep. And it's a very integral part of this book. And I think you all will be fascinated by what he has to say about things like that.
I don't think anybody can really guess what's gonna be in this one, even though that after the ending of the last one, it's pretty clear where I'm going. But the history that gets woven in and how it gets woven in, I don't think anybody's gonna be able to guess at a time.
You know, the really great thing about doing this event 2 days before anybody else can sell this book, you're the only people who get to buy this book, is that you can't, there are no spoilers out there. Nobody has yet posted a 1-star review on Amazon because
Oh, it's coming. It's coming.
I know. But, you know, I mean, seriously, it's wonderful to be, you know, to have the privilege of being able to be the first people to read this finished book. Now, what I have here, where to go? I'll show you. This is, there we go. This is what I get to read. This is called a galley or an advanced reading copy. And it came to me, I don't remember quite how far back, but a while back. So I got to read it with, you know, Jack would like me to have
I don't
read-
like those being out there. David, you're
know.
fired. That's not where that's not supposed to go out because it's not the best product yet. So I don't like having those go out there. I did for the first book because the first one was done so far in advance. Because with fiction, you have to have it done before you submit it to an agent or a publisher or something like that. Nonfiction, you can sell an idea or a paragraph or an outline
Right.
or something. So that's pretty much in its final form. And I was already writing True Believer before I'd even sent the first one to Simon and Schuster. So that one's pretty close. But the others, I don't like putting the others out there because it's not the best yet. There's still editing to do. There's still refinement to do. But a few happen to get out there. A few snuck out there, David. I don't know how that happened. Make a note. Make a note. Yep.
Right. Well, it will comfort you to know that at the rate with which I read, I probably didn't notice the little glitches in there. But I did notice that Jack does thank the poison pen in the acknowledgments, which I think is very nice. So I want to
Of
thank
course.
you
Thank
for
you.
doing that.
Oh, thank you.
That was great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about script writing and the other side of your life. But you know what? Before we do that, there was a great question from the last session, which I didn't even think to ask. Talk to us about your podcast for a minute. And the question was, which I thought was great, did Jack start the podcast in order to gain inspiration from whatever the podcast was about to include in his books?
Yeah, so the answer was no. It started because I started to get all these questions on Instagram, social media, and they didn't really lend themselves to a one-sentence type of an answer. And everybody who spent any time in the comment section of any social media platform knows that it's not very productive to go back and forth on any topic. Doesn't matter what it is. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I just start a podcast and I'll be able to have conversations about some things that people are asking me about, and I'll just put it out there like that and can point people in that direction. And then it started, and it was successful right out of the gate. And a lot more work also than I anticipated, but I do really enjoy it because it's a chance to put down my phone, put it on airplane mode. I'm not in front of the computer. There's no emails popping up. David can't get in touch with me for another few hours, so that's fantastic. Just kidding. And I sit down and I just have a conversation, uninterrupted conversation, which is really rare these days, because even if we're talking, you feel that buzz in your pocket, you kind of just look, make sure it's not an emergency, or do the kids need me, what's happening, and then put it away, but it's still an interruption in that flow of conversation. So I really enjoy doing it. But there's some books, I've read all the books by every author who've come on thus far. I don't know if I'll always be able to do that, but I have thus far. And a lot of times I want to read the book, or I would have wanted to have read it, but it would have fallen lower on the priority list with all these things that are going on. But because they're coming on, I'm forced to read the book and come up with questions and then have this conversation. And multiple times over the last 2 years, from those conversations or from those books, I have incorporated elements that I've learned into the novels, to include this one. Brian Mora, he has a book called The Able Archers out there. He spent a ton of years in the intelligence field, and our conversation led to something in this book. I'll do a tiny little spoiler because it's not a huge one. That there was a guy who was in 1983. We almost had a nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union, and there was one guy on watch in the Soviet Union who wasn't even supposed to be on watch that night. The guy who was supposed to be on watch got sick. This officer is there instead, and they have their system that shows that we have launched nuclear missiles at the Soviet Union. And so that's what they're seeing on their screen, like in war games or something. And most everybody else would have launched back. That was the protocol, to launch back before they impact, obviously. But he knew something was off. And this one guy had studied the enemy, meaning us, the United States. He really put in that time. He was kind of an academic, and he didn't. With pressure from above, with the protocols being in place to launch, and he doesn't launch. And all this was classified up until I think it was I would say 99. I might be a little off. I talk about it in the acknowledgement section of in the author's note section. But I wouldn't have gone deep down that rabbit hole had it not been for this podcast with Brian and getting to know him, and it works its way in. So the podcast, there's a lot more overlap than with the novels than I anticipated at the outset.
So I also forgot to ask Jack. We know about the nonfiction for September 24, but is there going to be a fiction book at this time next year? We don't want to panic you all thinking that he has swapped in forever for narrative nonfiction.
Yes. As things stand right now, yes, I'm on track to book number 7 to be out this time next year in the James Reese series. And then a few months later in the fall, that targeted book on the Beirut barracks bombing will be out. And in the meantime, we'll keep working on scripts for the spin-off series for Amazon and the next series with Chris Pratt, based on the second novel, True Believer. But right now it's pencils down because of the writer's strike. So as soon as we pick those back up, we'll get back to work on that and start filming.
So tell us about the spin-off series, because that might be news to some people.
Yeah, so the spinoff is based on the character Ben Edwards from the first book, played by Taylor Kitsch in the show, and that's one of the characters that I thought was much more fully developed on the page for the show, and then what Taylor brought to it just elevated it to a next level. And Taylor's just awesome. I was just texting him on the way over here, and he's super fired up about finishing up his current project and diving right into this one. And Chris Pratt will be in 3 of these 7 episodes of this spinoff. But I was thinking spinoffs all along, and that's why I put in multi-generations for the Reese family, for the Hastings family into my novels, just to give, so I don't all of a sudden get to, let's say, book 15 and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to write somebody else. I should make Rafe Hastings or James Reese have an interesting father or grandfather, 15 books in. So I wanted to do that along the way. So that was very intentional. I got that from Stephen Hunter, and he told me he didn't mean to do that. He put some things in there that he meant to take out, particularly to Point of Impact, and the editor, he didn't catch them all. So they left some things in there that ended up working out great for him later, for all of us readers later. So I did that very intentionally. So I came back from the premiere. We did the premiere in June of last year. It actually dropped on July 1st, but we went out to LA and did the premiere, and then I came home, and for some reason I had a full day all to myself at the house, which is very odd. And the only reason I think of that is because I can remember the chair that I was sitting in, and I would never pick that chair to actually do any work in because kids, wife, dog, constant interruptions. So I was in that chair all day, and so I just sat there and wrote from morning till very late, and wrote a spinoff and wrote 8 episodes, and so I had it all, and then I sent it to the showrunner. And a showrunner is like a director in a feature film. A showrunner like mismanaging multiple directors and that sort of thing. So I sent it to him, and he loved it. And then a couple days later, Chris Pratt called and said, he's like, I have an idea for a spinoff I want to run by you. And I was like, all right. And he pitched it to me, and it wasn't at all close to what I had written. And I said, Chris, that sounds fantastic. Let's do that. So, which was 100% the right answer there. So I still have this spinoff that I'm just keeping. Maybe we'll do it someday, maybe not. We'll see. But so for Chris was like, hey, let's do this Taylor Kitsch character, this Ben Edwards character. I'm gonna give if you want to do it, I'm gonna give Taylor a call next and see what he says. And then he called Taylor, and Taylor was all in. So now we're doing that right now. We have about 5 of the 7 episodes written, and then we'll get back to work on it when we start. But when we start back up after this writer's strike. But it's more of an international espionage type thriller, showing how that character. It's a prequel origin story for those who have seen the show. You might be wondering, like, how do you do a spinoff with that guy? Is he around anymore? So yeah, it's a more of an international espionage type thriller from the SEAL teams to the CIA, whereas the Terminal List was like a action thriller, a conspiracy thriller, and this is going international, and it's really cool. I'm super fired up, and also what I like about it is people can't compare it to a book because there's no book. So for fans of the book that looked at it and were like, this is different, this is different, this is different, I hate it, that doesn't apply. So it's super fun. I can't wait to get back to work with everybody.
The writer's strike is really going to be interesting. The last writer's strike brought us reality television. This writer's strike, I think, is going to bring AI into greater prominence because it can't actually go on strike. And where I think it will show up, this is just a prediction, but reasonably informed, is that it's going to accelerate fan fiction. And then the question is, will the fan fiction want to be sold and create a revenue stream, and then what will that do for the author of the real universe? Some of you may not know that 50 Shades of Grey began as fan fiction for Twilight.
Barbara, what's 50 Shades of Grey? I don't know. What are you talking about?
You've already chastised me for saying shit. So what is it you think I'm going to say?
I'll look it up later. I'll Google it later.
Thank you very much. So right now, the television stuff is all on hold because the writer's strike of who knows what duration prevents anybody from actually working. And as I understand it, the writers' union today has refused to make an exemption for the Tonys. So there may or may not be a Tony's Award because it requires content, writing. Yeah.
You seem disappointed in this. Is this you're gonna be okay? All right.
Well, me too, but I just pointing it out. But the great thing about writing fiction is that writers, there is no writer's strike for authors. Publishers can downsize you. Readers can abandon you. Terrible things can happen to you as a writer and short circuit your career. But it's really in your hands to a great degree, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Not a union.
Yeah, it's so I'm not in the WGA yet, but at the end of this one, the spinoff, so I'm co-creating it with the showrunner David DiGilio, who's just an awesome guy. So we're co-creating it together. I'm writing the finale episode, and then we have a writer's room that's all together. So it really affects that writer's room because this is all that they do. And a big part of this, the streaming part of it it's been coming for a while, but the new edition is the AI you talked about. So that's a big part of these negotiations and a huge concern for these writers that's how they make their living in these writers' rooms. So I'm hopeful that they'll get to some sort of figure this thing out over the next couple months. The last one was 100 days. So that just makes every show move 100 days to the right. So we'll see what happens, but we're deep enough into it that once we pick back up, finish these 2 episodes. And for me, I'm not part of the WGA, but I'm pencils down on it as well, out of respect for everything that they have going on. So that just means I reprioritize book 7, work on that, work on the nonfiction, and keep going forward.
So if you've been paying attention, we have book 7, we have the narrative nonfiction, we have script writing, even if Chris Pratt came up with a different version. And I think to myself, did you know back when you were like in training to be a SEAL and working on physical stamina that you were going to need it to be a successful writer?
No, and I thought I'd have plenty of time to continue working out because I thought I'd go to the mountains, live in a cabin, send my manuscript off to Simon & Schuster, do an interview, start the next book, and that was not at all how it was or how it is. Today, you really have to take ownership of all of it. You can't just leave it up to a publisher like you essentially you had to in 1975, 85, 95 because these platforms didn't exist with which you could add value throughout the year to people's lives, whether it's on Instagram or Twitter or a podcast or a blog or whatever else. So you really had to rely more on your publisher for those more traditional things like an interview or a book tour, that sort of thing. But I found very quickly, about a month or 2 before the first book came out, that I was going to have to treat this like an entrepreneurial venture and just like you would do all the things you have to do for any business that you were starting in your garage on your own. You came up with your computer in 1977, you're in your garage and it's an amazing computer, but now people have to know that it exists. And how are you going to do that? How are you going to show them how this computer adds value to their life? And you have to be the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, the social media manager. You have to be the creative. You have to build the product, which in this case is the book. So all those same things that any entrepreneur would have to do to starting a business, you have to do as an author. You don't have to do it, but you can do it as an author today to engage with people. And I use most of those different platforms just to say thank you, because back 30 years ago, the only chance you got to say thank you was now on book tour. Maybe at the end of an interview, if you did like a CBS This Morning or something like that, if you were one of those authors, you could say, oh, hold on real quick. Thank you to everyone who makes this all possible. Thank you to my readers. And now I get to do it every day on social media for somebody who reaches out and says, I love the book. I told my dad, he's a fan now. Or I told somebody at work and their kid's going off to boot camp tomorrow and they listen to the podcast, and I can say I can just thank them on there. And I really enjoy doing that. It means so much to me because for the first book, I mean, you took a risk on me as a brand new author. And I've known a couple people in media before, like Joe Rogan, and I knew Chris optioned the book before it was even published. And now I am so glad that they didn't mention it until Savage Son hit the New York Times list, because now no one can say the only reason that you hit the New York Times list is because you were on Rogan. So I've known him for years. So I was like, man, why isn't he asking me on the show? It sure would be helpful to hit 40 million people with this thing. And we're texting back and forth. I'm like, but it took him till the book hit the New York Times list. And then a couple days later, he texts and says, hey, you want to come on the show? And I said, absolutely. Let's do this. And then Tucker didn't have me on until after it hit the list, and Chris didn't post about the show until after it hit the list as well. So now I'm grateful to them for not doing it ahead of time, because it was all grassroots. It was all somebody taking a risk on me as an author, picking up this thing and then telling a friend or telling a family member at the dinner table or posting it to their 5 social media followers or their 5,000 or whatever it is. But it was all word of mouth. It was modern day word of mouth. And that, I think, made it really powerful and really, really different. So now I thank those guys when I see them for not helping me out earlier on. Yeah.
And you're thanking me for actually helping you out from the beginning, right?
Absolutely. You were the first person.
So that reminds me that almost every one of our events is streamed. So they exist on the Poison Pen video page on Facebook, and they also exist on YouTube. You can, at the moment, you'll have to scroll all the way back through time, but you can actually watch Jack and me talking about the first 5 books if you go to either of those platforms. Now, since I mentioned AI, my husband has taken on a project which he says he can make work with chat, whatever it is. Thank you, ChatGPT, where he is going to create an index. So you will be able to go and type in Jack Carr, and then all of them will come up and you don't have to scroll through years of videos. But anyway, they do exist. And you might be able to search YouTube. Patrick, where are you? Patrick, is it possible to search YouTube in a way that you can't search our Facebook video page? It is, isn't it? Okay, so here, repeat that.
Okay, so once you're on our Poison Pen YouTube page, you can search within there, of course, and we have a vast archive of photo or videos going way back.
Actually, on YouTube, they go all the way back to 1995. I know. And recently, since Zoom came along, which was just a better tool for us to be doing all the stuff we've been doing since 1995, my same husband, who needs more employment, decided that it's for better or worse, but not for lunch. This is my motto. And anyway, he has taken the soundtrack from all the Zooms and the streaming and turned them into podcasts. And right now we are at 225,000 podcast downloads. So if you can also listen to them if you don't want to watch them. But I don't we weren't using Zoom with the terminalist. I don't
remember.
Well, you were here.
Yeah, I don't remember what was over in the corner.
I know, right. So you might not be able to find Jack on all of the podcasts. But anyway, I think that's a great thing. So before we take questions, one more thing. Talk to us about the gatekeepers that have made your career possible, because they stem from your relationships with people that you served with.
Yeah.
You've been incredibly fortunate that you had 2 key people that helped you with all this.
I did. Yeah. Johnny Sanchez was the guy I served with in the SEAL teams, and got out a little after September 11th and went into finance, but kept tabs on what was going on in the SEAL teams. So we knew each other. We didn't serve directly together, but you're aware of everyone through reputation. And in the SEAL teams, or maybe in life in general, but in the special operations, your reputation is your currency, essentially. If you see your character, then that reputation really takes care of itself. So as I was getting out, Johnny Sanchez had stayed in contact with different people in the community and in the SEAL teams, and found out I was writing a book, and called me and said, hey man, I heard you're writing a book. Do you want to talk to this guy named Brad Thor? And I said, yeah. Would he talk to me? Because I didn't know anybody in publishing, didn't know anybody in Hollywood, didn't know agents. All I knew about agents was from Entourage and Californication, so I didn't really know anything at all. I just was writing this story. And he said, yeah, I helped Brad Thor out with some of the SEAL portions of his last couple books, and he owes me a favor, so let me hook this phone call up. So talked to Brad and had a little conversation with him. And I remember I was in my Land Cruiser up in Los Angeles on this corner of a parking lot, because I was trying to just not be interrupted, and the sun was beating down. around, and my Land Cruiser was a little bit loud, and so I'm just sweating, and I had this yellow legal pad to take notes, and had this conversation with Brad for about a half hour in that I'm just baking in this thing. And it was like a job interview at first, and he wanted to make sure I was writing for the right reasons, because now I know how many people tell you that they want to be an author. And he took this phone call and kind of interviewed me, and I talked to him about my mom being a librarian and reading all these books growing up, and knowing that I wanted to serve my country as a SEAL, and then I wanted to write these thrillers, the same kinds like I read growing up. And then he said, okay, just stop, that's enough. Hey, your friend Johnny Sanchez, he told me some things you did in the SEAL teams, and as a thank you for what you did, I will let Simon & Schuster know it's coming if you finish this. And he said, I can't promise you they'll open the box, can't promise you that they will even read one word, certainly can't promise you that they'll like it, but I can at least tell them that it's coming as a thank you for what you did. And I was like, okay, that's all I need. And he said, when's it done? And I said, it'll be done in a year. And so I called him back in a year, and it was really cool. Also, he said, don't call me during that year. Don't send me chapters. Don't ask me for advice, because I'm busy. And I said, and now I appreciate that, because now I don't know if I would have been like, oh, now we're best buddies, can I send you a chapter? So I was really, now looking back, it was really cool that he told me that he wasn't going to help me along the way. There was no crutch with anyone else. So I really, looking back, that was really cool of him. So called him back in a year, and this is when he did another very cool thing. I said, it's done, and he said, is it done, or is it the best that it can possibly be? And I said, well, it's done, because I made my first deadline, probably my only deadline I've ever made. And he said, well, call me back when it's as good as you can make it. So I took another 4 months and read it and edited it, back and forth, just until I could get it to this place where I knew that if I stayed with it for another 40 years, it would get better by a degree or two. And then I called him back and said, now it's done, and it's as good as I can get it. And he said, okay, I'll let Emily Bessler at Simon & Schuster know that it's coming. And sent it off to Emily. She read it, loved it, and next thing you know, we're off to the races. And then we get it coming up on publication. This galley comes out in the fall of 2017. So the book comes out in March of 2018. And then I get a call from another buddy in the SEAL teams. And he says, it was Jared Shaw, and he said, hey, do you remember me? And I said, absolutely, I remember you. How's it going? And he said, well, do you remember what you did for me in the SEAL teams? And I didn't remember. And he said, well, you're the only person that sat me down in your office as I was getting out and talked to me about moving from the SEAL teams into the private sector. You introduced me to people in the private sector. You followed up with me to see how that was going, and nobody else in the teams did that. And I always wanted to thank you. And I said, no problem. How's it going? And he said, it's going great, but I heard you have a book coming out. And I said, yeah, I got this thing called The Galley. I just learned about it, a couple weeks prior maybe. And I said, I can send you that. And he said, yeah, I'd like that, but I'd like to give it to a friend of mine. And I said, who's that? And he said, Chris Pratt. So I said, that's very convenient for me, because that's who I want to play the title character. So Jared read it, gave it to Chris. Chris read it the last week in December of 2017, and called the first week in January 2018 and wanted to option it. So, and now Jared, he starred as Boozer in the show, for those who watched it. So that's Jared. And he was a producer on it. Now he's executive producing along with me this next spinoff series, and he's writing on it as well. So yeah, amazing. I mean, I figure if I'm sitting down in my little rental house in Coronado, California, in an office off the bedroom, I might as well. I'm writing my first sentence of a book, and no one's ever heard of me. I should probably pick my A-list star I want to star in it, and the director. And I've got to pick my editor at Simon & Schuster too, because I went to the back of Brad Thor's books and Vince Flynn's books, and I saw them thanking this person named Emily Bessler. So I decided that Emily would be my publisher and editor, and now she is. It's pretty much that easy, Barbara.
Trust me, it's not usually that easy. Now, Jack was lucky that people paid forward the wonderful things that he did for them. Not everybody is grateful, but you were fortunate that they were. But Jack has also made an important point for any of you who are potential writers in here. You can't be a published author if eventually you don't turn in your manuscript. I mean, a lot of people just are afraid to do it. They write something and they won't let it go. And, it has to move on if you're ever going to have it become a galley and then a book.
Yeah, eventually you have to execute. You can study how to do something now until the end of time, but eventually you have to do it and execute. And then some of probably the best books ever written are sitting on somebody's bedside table right now, or on someone's hard drive, just because they think they're going to make it a little bit better. And they haven't gone and taken that next step and figured out how to try to find an agent, or gone to Thriller Fest or BoucherCon, where you can do this thing called agent speed dating. And I know 3 people that have sat down. You get like 2 minutes with an agent, and then you bounce from about 30 in this room. And I know 3 people that have gotten publishing deals that way. They found their agent and then gotten publishing deals.
That's a whole other thing about Thriller Fest, but we're running out of time. It will be time for audience questions, and Patrick's going to take the microphone.
All right, let's do it.
Leading from the front. First of all, Jack, I want to thank you for getting me back into fiction. That's what Terminalist did for me because I was so impressed by my dad served in the Corps, so I grew up loving military history and stuff. And just as the character, I'm just like, there was the NCIS scene. I'm like, there's some really detailed shit he's talking about that I know has to be. Well, I'm just trying to bond with Jack.
I understand.
You know, well, you'll love this.
There was an NCIS guy in the last group, and gave me his card on the way out, and I'm like, oh. Because if people who have read it or seen the show, even we snuck some things in about NCIS there, you could discern that I might not be the biggest fan of NCIS.
There's a touch. There's a touch. Well, then you'll love this. To call back to intestines around a tree. As I was driving here, I got to ask, were you inspired by movies like Charlie Bronson's The Evil That Men Do? When you come up with the creativity of, I
haven't seen that one. I'm going to look it up now, though.
Dude.
The Evil That Men Do from Charles Bronson?
Charles Bronson.
Ooh,
my dad showed me that when I was like probably 11, which would not be a good thing these days. But if you haven't seen it, I'm actually shocked you haven't.
I missed that one. Man.
Yeah. So, well, there you go.
I'm going to go get mad at my parents.
Super fast question. I've been following you for a couple years, and I know your most recommended book is Once an Eagle. Got through it last year, and I know that when you would give the book to people, you would write a letter before and a letter after.
Yeah.
Have you thought about penning like an open letter to people who have followed that journey and are interested in hearing your thoughts?
Yeah, there's some stuff, interestingly enough, in the spin-off. I think I'll leave it at that, but because you never know it's going to get cut at any point in the process. But Once an Eagle, for those who have not read it, it's a book that came out in 1968 by Anton Meyer, and it's a historical fiction, but it's essentially a case study in leadership, and it follows two guys from pre-World War I up to Vietnam. And one guy is an officer, and he's an officer the entire time. Another guy is an enlisted guy who gets his battlefield commission in World War I, and that officer is always one step ahead. He's like this political type of a creature, and he is one step ahead of the guy who got the battlefield commission. And essentially, yes, it's a case study in leadership. So I would give this book to people starting off their time in uniform, and I'd write this letter in the front that would set the tone for why I'm giving you this gigantic book. Did you speed read it? It's a quick read, isn't it? No, oh, nice. That only took you made it in a year. That's pretty good. Yeah, it's like double. It's like twice the size of mine. It's pretty serious. You have to invest some time in that one. But I'd give them that book with that letter, set the tone, and then at the end there would be another letter back there that was sealed. And so I told them you have to read this thing to get to the final letter at the end, which is my take on what you just read, because I don't want to influence your reading experience before. So you have to read it, and then you'll have my take at the end, and it might not be theirs, but I don't want to have that out there before. They want them to experience it the same way I did. So I don't think I'd ever do the letter at the end because people would read it first. So you have to get a password or something, prove that you read it first. But maybe the first letter at some point, maybe. Yeah, interesting. I'm glad you read it. It's awesome. Yeah, and it's great for kids. I think in junior high school. I think it'd be a great book for them. Yeah. Next, I'm gonna call on somebody right here, Patrick, because you're not gonna see this hand. Yes, sir. Lights hat, by the way. Yes, sir.
Ever run up against? You're writing about military stuff. I wasn't in the military, but I did weapon systems, and it seemed like you're always running up against a clearance problem. When you're talking about something, you don't even realize it, and then you get thumped for it. Have you ever run when you're in your books? You ever run up against stuff like that?
So I submitted the first 3 books to the Department of Defense, to their Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review. And when I started, I saw on their website, they said they get back to you in 30 days. And the first book, they got back to me in 45, which I thought was pretty good for a gigantic bureaucracy. They took out about nine words or sentences in that first one, which I thought, okay, well, for the first 3. Then for the second one, I submitted that one. 30 days passes, 45 days passes, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, creeping on up on 7 months, and that's when they finally get back to me. So we had to push the publication date from April to, or March, I think at that time, to July, and it just. But this time now I have lawyers, so I was like, okay, let's appeal this, and just do whatever you do. And so they tied every single redaction to a publicly available government document. So something, not just something that's on Wikipedia or somebody else's book, but something that anyone anywhere in the world can download or go to a website from the United States government. So they tied every one of those 54 redactions to that. We submitted the appeal on time, and they let me win in 30, I want to say 38 or 39 of those. So by this point, the hardcover is published, and I have those redactions in there, just kept them in blacked out. So when the paperback came out, I unredacted those things so people could compare the hardcover to the paperback and see, like, why was the government so concerned about this? It's weird that they only let me win on 39 because all 54 were tied to publicly available government documents. But everybody needs a job, so we'll go with that. And so I did the same thing with the third one, and once again down to the wire in order to keep it on publication schedule. And then they took out some things in there as well. But then for the next one, for The Devil's Hand, I didn't want to turn that in because I learned everything in there through research after my time in the military, specifically for this book. And that one went down the rabbit hole on bioweapons research, what the government calls biodefense research. And I didn't want them just taking out sections of the book that I learned afterward through my own research. So I didn't turn that one in. And then same thing with the last one. I didn't want to turn it in because all the research I did into quantum computing and artificial intelligence was all done afterward. So so I haven't submitted. So the first 3 were submitted, and then I don't do it anymore. There's enough time has passed, I think, between when I was in and now. And I guess if they have a problem with that, they can talk to my attorney, I guess.
Me, I made bows and arrows for 50 years, but the 10 years prior to that, after I got out of school, I did the Stinger missile program for 10 years. So you get all kinds of questions about that, and that's a top secret clearance. But I mean, you're taken off of it when you leave the business, but it's still, you can't talk about it. So you still make the damn thing. So if people called me and knew that I was doing the thing, and you're always getting to thinking about writing something, you're doing something, experience book of some kind, whether it's hunting or whatever it might be. But that comes up, and I just wonder if you ever bounce off something like that.
Yeah, no, just in those terms. But congratulations on the recent sale, by the way. So PSE Archery Legend here in the front row. I love my NTN 33. I was just talking about it on the podcast the other day, actually. So yeah. Put it in the book. Put it in Savage Son. So it's in those pages as well. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Hey, how's it going now, Ray? I'm retired Air Force. So on your last book,
I thought you were going to say NCIS. I was like, oh man.
No, and I really appreciate just all the humor throughout. Like when you were talking, when Reese is talking to the Air Force colonel, I was like, all right, Air Force represented in the book finally, But I really appreciate that. And then the question I had is Chris Pratt going to continue, or the Amazon series, is that going to continue? And I thought about Katie, like. That doesn't match at all the reporter in the first, in the series on Amazon. So that's the question I had.
Yeah, so Chris is, and anything can go off the rails at any time in Hollywood. So now the plan is to go into True Believer after we're finished with this spin-off series and roll right into True Believer starring Chris. So going into it, I always knew that there were going to be changes. Just growing up, doing all this reading, and then reading the book, watching the show, watching the film. So coming at it from a fan perspective, but really I'm a student of it my entire life. I'm a student of this craft, of writing in particular, but then also that interest. I love movies and I love TV shows and all of these things. So I knew you're telling a story visually. So in the pages of a novel, I can just blow up the Golden Gate Bridge, no big deal. But there's budgets when it comes to these shows, and you can't just do all these things. You have set pieces, you have budgets, you have time limits. There are more rules when it comes to things in screenwriting. So it's a very collaborative process, where is this very solitary? This is just me. When it comes to screenwriting, it's a whole a team of writers. I think we have 7 right now. We had about 9 in the writers' room for the Terminal List, but it's very collaborative, up and down the chain, top of Amazon, back down with notes, incorporate those or argue them, and it's just a very team-oriented type of a thing. So I knew there was always going to be changes. In my first conversation with the showrunner, David DiGilio, in December of 2019, I think we had our first conversation, and we've talked every day since. I relayed to him that I understood that there was going to be changes going forward, and I always think of the novel First Blood, 1972, very different than the early 80s Sylvester Stallone movie, but both fantastic. So I went into it with that attitude of knowing there's going to be changes, wanting to be a part of that process. And for me, for Chris, for Antoine Fuqua, and for David DiGilio, we wanted to just make sure that whatever changes were made stayed rooted in the realities of modern warfare, so that when somebody went downrange over the last 20 years, sits back on their couch, cracks open a beer, and turns this thing on, that they at least know we put in the effort. And there's always going to be Hollywood hot sauce attached to these things, but we want to stay rooted in those realities of modern combat. We don't want to make it for critics. We're making it for that person who went downrange, who's now watching this show. And Chris would say that in every meeting. Antoine would say that in every meeting. And I was so lucky on set to have my buddy Jared Shaw there every single day, my buddy Ray Mendoza, another buddy from the SEAL teams who did the technical advising on it, and then Max Adams, Army Ranger, who's a writer in Hollywood. Those 3 guys on set every single day, and Chris Pratt, Antoine, and the showrunner trusting them. So if something wasn't right, it would change. We'd reshoot it, and Antoine wants to make sure that that somebody who was in the SEAL teams, was in Special Forces, was an Army Ranger, watches this thing and is like, oh, these guys put in the work to try to get it right.
Hey, Jack.
What's up, man?
Good to see you. Thank you for your service. I followed your career since then closely, and just to have written one book would be a very big deal. It boggles my mind how you juggle now books, movies, podcasts, nonfiction. In your books, though, specifically, there's a lot about family, a lot about relationships. How do you juggle? So I can tell it's important to you. How do you juggle this crazy career with family?
Yeah. So we're busy. We're busy, but I'm very lucky that Faith is so understanding. She was so understanding for all those years in the military, and she's building this with me. And I guess we have our the things that she does, which is everything else but the writing, and to give me that time to write. So she's doing all the finance stuff. She's doing all that side, and so I just write. But for me, it's just trying to do the best I can, just like we all are, and trying to be a better. It's strange to say today, better husband and father. And as I say this, I'm like, well, it's Mother's Day, and I'm not with my family. So maybe I need to work on that one a little bit. Maybe I need to work on that a little bit. But yeah, I want to be a better husband, father today than I was yesterday. I want to be a better author today than I was yesterday. I want the next sentence to be better than the one I just wrote. Just like in the SEAL teams, I want to be a better leader and a better operator than I was yesterday. I want to earn that trident every day. The trident's the thing that we wear on our uniforms right here that designates you as a SEAL. So you want to earn that every day because of the people who went before you that sacrificed so much and passed along lessons that you wouldn't in turn have to learn in blood. So it's for me, it's all about self-improvement, and really it's just doing the best I can. You're juggling so much, which is why working out, sleep, and nutrition have fallen to the bottom of the list. And because I listen to some of another podcast, or you see somebody post something and they say, you want to wake up. You wake up at like 3:30 in the morning and then hang from about 20 minutes by your gravity boots. When you're done with that, you make your peat moss tea, and while that thing is heating up, you journal for about a half hour, and then you just want to sit there and meditate for about 45 minutes or so before getting into your cold plunge, but making sure we get that for the gram, and then into the sauna. And by that point, now you can have the most effective day. By that point, it's time to pick the kids up at school. For me. So it's like you're just getting shot out of a cannon every single morning, and trying to do it better each and every day. That's really it. Just like everybody else, I was trying to do the best we can.
Hey, Jack. My name is Rico.
I've
been following you. Thank you very much. Ever since you came onto Jocko's podcast, that's the first time I'd have heard about the Terminal List, and have been an absolute fan of everything you've done ever since. I noticed on Instagram that you do a lot of this day in history, and you'll talk about a lot of very historical, very important things that have happened. And I'm just wondering, is that something that you take the time to actually to go through and make sure all that information is in there and it's correct, or do you have a team of people that help you with those sorts of things, or That's
It'd be a lot smarter to have a team that did that, but no, it's that's all me. So luckily with the history ones, they come up once every year. So so once you have that done, you can just kind of tweak some language. Like if it was the 80th anniversary last year, it's probably the 81st this year, and then so make little tweaks like that. But no, I went through all of those because for me, I wanted to look at social media as something I could do to add value to people's lives throughout the year, rather than just saying, hey, check me out on vacation, or here we are with whatever. I wanted to add value to people's lives, and so I thought about all the things that I was passionate about. One of which is history, particularly history of warfare and terrorism, and so I started doing those. And then just as an anniversary would come up that I was aware of just from my study, I'd write another one. And so now I had a collection after a year of doing that. So for the next year, I just morphed them a tiny little bit, maybe read them again, caught a couple mistakes in there, like some grammar or whatever, and I tweaked that, and then just repost them again the following year. So the history stuff is extremely important to me because there's so many answers in the pages of history if we just take time to go back there and put down that phone, stop tweeting, start reading, get back into those pages of history, and really think about why we have maybe some of the freedoms and the opportunities and options that we do. Like, why do we have those? Well, those answers are back in the pages of history, or any issue, really, rather than just jumping onto social media and retweeting something that came from someone with a lot of followers who also didn't put in the requisite time, energy, and effort into studying the issue. So the history stuff's important to me. And now Fox News Digital has picked them up and is posting those on Fox News Digital as well.
Nice.
So that's kind of cool. And then of course one of them is now turning into this book that comes out in a year and a half. So for me it's important to do that, but it's another way that I can engage with people. I can hopefully add value, and it's something that you couldn't have done as an author 20, 30 years ago.
Well, I appreciate the effort, and it's incredibly important that we don't forget those things. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate the support.
How much time do we have, Barbara? One more? Somebody over here? All right. Up there, too? I'm just going to go. Go for it. She's going for it, apparently. Let's see if we can do yours, too.
Yeah, so for send me that video and what happened behind it. Yeah, so I got just a call from Tim Kennedy and said, hey, asked if I he let me know what they were doing and asked if I wanted to be involved in it, and I said absolutely. How can I help? Because back in Afghanistan, back in 2003, I remember being in the back of a Hilux pickup truck with one of the an Afghan who is now kind of essentially working for us, and I remember sitting there in the back of that truck with him, talking to him, and thinking, man. If he'd studied what we did at the end of Vietnam, what we did to, let's say, the Kurds at the end of the first Gulf War, we don't have a great history of supporting those that really stand up when we're doing something like a overseas counterinsurgency type of a campaign, which was what we were doing in Afghanistan. And I thought, oh man, this guy is going to be in trouble when we leave. And at the time, I thought we're going to leave in like a year or two. And that was 2003. In fact, I thought I was late to the game in 2003. I was doing something else on September 11th and ended up, it was a pretty cool mission. I'm glad I got to do it looking back. But I was like, oh man, if I got it's 2003 and now I'm in Afghanistan. I barely made it. This is awesome. Whew, lucky. And then that obviously was not a big issue. We had plenty of opportunities to continue to go downrange to Afghanistan. But all those people that helped us out, it wasn't going to end well for them once we picked up and left. So for Tim to tell me that what they were doing and how they were going about it, and they're trying to get these people that work for us overseas as interpreters, and they're much more than interpreters overseas. I mean, they're looking at the body language of whoever else, they're interpreting that as well. They're giving advice based off culture and based off season, based on all sorts of different things. So they're just such a value add to us over there. So many guys would have come home, more people would have come home dead with not for these interpreters who could like read the terrain from a local's point of view. So when he said they were trying to get guys out, I said, yeah, I'm in. How can I help? So really, it's just, for me, it was about spreading the word. For those guys, they actually flew in and conducted a bunch of missions. And I think there's a movie that might be in the works about some of those operations. So I was just trying to help out however I could.
Hey, Jack, just wanted to say thanks.
Nice shirt. That's a good one right there.
Just wanted to say thanks for writing my favorite novel series in the last several years. I absolutely love it. I tear through each one of your books every time I get one. But just a really quick question. I know you've said several times when you started writing this, you envisioned Chris Pratt playing James Reese and Antoine Fuqua directing. did you have an idea of who Freddie Strange should be played by, Rafe Hastings, all these other important side characters to Reese as well? And can you maybe confirm if we're going to maybe see some of that coming up?
So the answer is yes. The second part is no. Because then if it doesn't end up being one of those people, I'll hear about it forever. So, but the casting process is really interesting, and Chris optioning it right out of the gate. But it's very natural for me as a child of the 80s just to pick who my A-list star, and he wasn't A-list at the time. When I started writing this in December of 2014, he'd been in Parks and Rec, so he's a little, overweight, jovial, funny guy. And then I saw, while he was doing that, or soon thereafter, he played a SEAL operator in Zero Dark 30, kind of a smaller role. So I got to see that transformation, and I thought, oh, this is the guy, because, and this is me, once again, with no connections anywhere, sitting in our little office off the bedroom, just picking people to be in my, I've written like one sentence at this point is what I'm trying to say. But as a child of the 80s, I was like, well, it makes sense to choose people here. So I thought Chris Pratt's the guy. He hasn't done this sort of a movie before. I saw that transformation, and I thought, oh, he needs to do this for his career. I'm going to give Chris this opportunity. And so I thought about it in those terms. And I think a lot of that goes back to watching Magnum growing up and how everybody loved Magnum. And he was funny, but then he could flip that switch. And in one of those episodes, it's the first time on network television where a protagonist shoots an unarmed antagonist, an unarmed bad guy. And it was shocking at the time. They had to fight to get that ending in there. And it's an awesome episode. So I thought back to that, of having a really likable protagonist and someone you want to sit down, have a beer with, have a whiskey with, have a coffee with, but also somebody who has the experience to flip that switch and get the job done. So I thought, yeah, this is Chris. And then I thought, my director, yes, Antoine. And I'm like, I love everything that he's done. Training Day, Tears of the Sun. I did a book, or a movie based on Point of Impact by Stephen Hunter, who we talked about. They called Shooter. And I just love everything that Antoine's done. So I picked Antoine as my director and picked Emily Bessler as my editor. And now we're all three doing all these things. But it's also very helpful for me to think of an actor playing a certain role as I'm writing. So there are different actors that I've pictured in other roles, but Chris was the only person I ever pictured as James Reese. And then when Taylor and Chris did their screen test, it was like, no, this is Ben Edwards right here. And Taylor absolutely crushed it. So hence the spinoff.
All right, I have an opportunity here to do a quick market research question to which there are no right answers, but I'd like an honest answer. How many of you would prefer that we move Jack's next event to a much larger venue and probably just do it once? And then the other half of the question is, how many of you would prefer that we stay in the bookstore? And, well...
Is there a right answer,
Wait.
Barbara?
Let me start over. So how many people would just assume that we move to a larger venue? And it's okay to say yes, because there is, as I said, no wrong answer.
We have one guy over here. One guy.
All
Look
right.
at him. Yeah.
I didn't see you. Sorry. All right. And how many of you are okay with this situation here? Really? That's so interesting, because Jack is actually going to be doing theaters in some places. And, there's a distance that occurs when Jack is up on a stage, and it's a different thing. So I just wanted to see, this is not necessarily super comfortable for you. The parking is a bitch, and I can't make the city of Scottsdale get its act together with parking. Believe me, I have tried. But anyway, if you're okay with this, then that gives us an answer
I guess we're coming back.
for next year. Okay. Yay. And the other thing that I want to do, I want to make a personal thank you to the gentleman in the green T-shirt back there from Fort Huachuca, who absolutely cold turkey yesterday let me do a little video about why he bought a ticket to come today. And I love it. And it's been a great Instagram post. So I'm going to give you the only copy of the 47th
Nice.
Samurai.
Winner. All right.
Right. It was an incredibly polished performance. I thought maybe he had stage experience or something. And also, I learned how to put text with the video for the first time. So it was, yay, it was a great deal. All right, so let's give Jack a big round of applause, everybody.